Welcome back to another episode of Boots on the Ground, where we discuss Israel's politics, war, and identity. Before we start, I want to thank our partners at Jerusalem Media Group and our sponsors, BeThereIsrael.com. Be There Israel provides live video streaming and production for events here in Israel. So even if you can't be part of the event in person, you can always be part of the Simcha. And as always, I'd like to ask all our listeners to click, share, like, and subscribe. Ari, we're finally both in the studio and back from reserve duty.
It's good to be back here with you, Sean.
It's great to be back in the studio with you again. We have a lot to talk about, a fortune to discuss. Israel's northern border, Gaza, the various heads of state speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, and a bunch of European countries suddenly recognizing Palestinian independence. And all of these things are connected. So, Ari, let's start with what's going on in Israel's northern border.
All right, so starting up north, as some of our listeners know, as you know, I just finished another round of reserve duty, round 5. We were based up on the Israeli-Syrian-Lebanese border, right at the triangle. And most of our operational duty was in Syria, so I have a very first-hand account of what's been going on up there. There's not much that's publicly acceptable, I think, or allowed to be talked about of a lot of what we're doing inside Syria. But the reality is that the ties between Israel and the Druze communities are strengthening week to week, day by day, and that we're developing more of relationships with the Druze communities on our border. The reality within Syria, deeper in Syria, is that it's the Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Ashara, Julani terrorist who
now wears a suit and presents himself at the United Nations.
Exactly. That person, he's more focused right now on solidifying his control over a very fractured society within the rest of Syria. There's even once you move further north from the Druze communities on our borders, Syria is a very fractured communities, and he's trying to solidify his control, both from a military, militia, arms perspective, that there should be no other large armed groups that threaten his control, and developing a sense, again, of Syrian nationalism under his command. That's what he's mainly been focused on, not focused on attacking Israel or trying to cause us harm. I don't really think he has much ability to, from my personal experience. It would be very hard for him to do that at this point. That's what's going on in Syria.
I'm just going to start. I think it's also important to point out that at the moment, not only doesn't he have a desire or an ability to cause harm, is we have proven, especially on the northern border, that we will act with full force, no holds barred, if Israelis are threatened from the northern border in any sense of the word, whether it comes from Syria or Lebanon. We don't really care to cause massive damage and destruction to their military capabilities.
Right. So I think what I was hinting at with Syria is that a lot of the operational duty that we had was more based towards Syria, not towards Lebanon, and a lot of what we do in Syria was very aggressive where it needed to be, and it was denying the minimal amount of ability for anyone to harm Israel. And I'm going to leave it at that, but I think that there's always going to be a desire. I think that any Islamic terrorist or anyone who's an Islamic extremist is always going to have a desire to harm Israel. And I don't think we're ever going to be able to change that. I think we can deny them the ability to do that. And the ability is both having the geographical proximity to us in order to do that, and the technological or material capacity with which to act on that desire. We're very good, at least in Syria, we've acted very aggressively in the depths of Syria to prevent Al-Julani, Ashara, whatever his name is now, from being able to have the ability to affect his desire. On the Lebanese side,
that's important. Right. It's very different. Lebanon is a completely different country. There are many other aspects in there. I'd very much like to hear your take. I also spent a little bit of time in that area, but
I also just did a short little stint in Lebanon, if I remember.
But like we said, Lebanon is different. It's a country that was set up with an uncomfortable mix of Christians and Muslims. It has gone through multiple wars, multiple civil wars, and it is only now slowly trying to rebuild itself as a functional country.
Right. So no matter how factitious or what's it called? Fractured Syria will ever be, Lebanon's always going to be even more fractured. There's that many more groups in Lebanon that are in that much closer proximity. It's a smaller country. And there's always going to be higher tensions internally within Lebanon than there ever were in Syria, which has a major effect on what's going on in Lebanon now, internally and externally towards us.
Right. So let me just back up a little bit and explain what we're talking about. In Lebanon, the country itself is ruled by a coalition that is supposed to be a cross coalition of Christians, Sunnis, and Shiite Muslims. Unfortunately, because of that, it also means the country is the government is invariably unable to do anything because they will never get all the sides to agree. So over the last almost half a century, the Lebanese government has been impotent. And then after a number of full-on civil wars between different factions, a new, well-funded and well-armed faction came about, Hezbollah, funded by the Iranians, a radical Islamic organization, and they basically became the power people, the army of southern Lebanon, and they were able to fight and in some cases even threaten northern Israel. And my experience was initially dealing with Hezbollah up until 2000 when Israel left southern Lebanon with the false belief that if we left Lebanon completely, left them to their own devices, they would no longer have any ability or even a claim to attack Israel. And we learned by 2006 that this was completely false, because Hezbollah were just itching for an opportunity to fight Israel again. And then after 2006, where there was a supposed agreement between Israel and the United Nations, Hezbollah continued to arm in a major way. We're talking about a military militia that had hundreds of thousands of rockets, ballistic missiles, drones, and equipment that would rival just about any other military in the Middle East.
Well, again, it was a misunderstanding that their desire, again, it's the combination of desire and ability. And Israel left southern Lebanon in 2000 under the false belief that their desire isn't to attack, destroy, and harm the Jewish people of the world. Their desire is to maintain control over their territory of southern Lebanon. And if we just left their territory, then all of a sudden there's no more friction between us, and they can maintain their ability to harm us, but they won't no longer have a desire to harm us. When reality is that their desire had nothing to do with a geographical place. They want to harm and kill Jews wherever they are. And we left them their ability, and their ability only grew and grew and grew until the beginning of the current war.
Right. So now I came back from viewing the Lebanon border with a completely different perspective, because I hadn't been there in nearly 20 years. And I was now looking at the Lebanon border, and I was looking at those same Lebanese villages that for years we knew that they were villages in name only. In all intents and purposes, they were military camps. We knew to the point that this house over there is actually a storage for RPGs. And this house over here is an ammo dump for AK-47 rifles and bullets. And over there, that house, that higher house over there, it's actually got cannons and anti-tank missiles stored inside it. And now I'm back on the northern border, and these villages are decimated. Israel realized that maintaining this threat there couldn't stand, and the villages have, in most cases, don't even exist. The high-rise building that was packed with anti-tank missiles has been flattened. The RPG storage is gone. The ammo dump where the AK-47s were held has been wiped out by artillery. And every single village that once threatened Israel looks like this now.
Right. We've pushed Hezbollah back much further north and further east. They're mainly in the valley, in the what's called the Emek HaBeka, the big valley
The Bekaa Valley.
the Bekaa Valley, which borders Syria, which is where we operated a little bit in that area. We can't. I'm not going to go into that, but the threat is still there. Hezbollah still exists. They still have the desire to kill us, and while we removed an enormous amount of their physical material with which they can harm us, they still maintain a large arsenal. It's just much further away and will require much more effort for them to use it at this point.
Right.
Which leads us to where we're at today in Lebanon.
Right. So I think we have to move on to our next subject, because we said there's a lot of things we want to cover. But I want to end by saying one of the things I noticed about the way the IDF is operating, maybe you saw this in Syria as well, but I definitely saw it in Lebanon, is we're taking initiative. We realized that the threats couldn't stand. The thousands of missiles pointed at us, the artillery pieces pointing at us, the tens of thousands of fighters just waiting to storm across our border and murder Israelis. We couldn't let that stand. So we took initiative. We wiped them out.
It's not just initiative, it's been aggressive and systematic.
Right.
Very systematic and very aggressive.
Even now, it's on the news relatively often. Every couple of days, a Hezbollah commander tries to sneak back into southern Lebanon, or they try and rebuild something, and immediately, whether it's the Air Force or artillery or even special forces, are taking care of them immediately.
Right.
There is no threat that isn't answered almost immediately. That's what I mean by taking initiative. We're not waiting to see where are they going to do something, are they not? No, there is a threat. It is a clear and present danger. It needs to be removed.
Right, and there's no ambiguity on the other side. There's no ambiguity from Israel of what our line is and what we're going to be, what's acceptable to us. The other side, whether it's in Syria or in Lebanon, understands that there's a line, and if they cross it, there's an automatic response.
Right. And now let's move on to our next thing, because what is interesting is that, like we've said, Israel has made a very clear line, and notice the international community is silent. Right. We're literally blowing things up in Lebanon, and the international community hasn't said a word. And that brings us to speaking about the international
community.
Right. So right now, there is the UN General Assembly, which happens every year. It's where all the leaders of the world run at this time of year, go to the United Nations in New York and give long-winded speeches about peace and happiness and all the wonderful things that they are hoping to achieve for the world. And it's very nice. It's at the United Nations, and there's a lot of cocktail parties, and it is supposed to be within the spirit of the United Nations. That means brotherhood among nations and peace and all of that. But it is the United Nations, so it also means it's a farce. And it is set up to be just another anti-Israel, or more particularly, an anti-Western roadshow.
Right.
So I don't want to get too much into it, but it's important to listen to some of the speeches. Some of them are always very good. Not necessarily because of their content, but because of what they are.
They're not saying.
They're not saying what they're proposing. So first and foremost, President Trump's speech was interesting in that he has a vision for a peaceful Middle East. Whether it is correct or incorrect, he has a real vision and a practical idea of how to achieve peace within certain regions. That is one. Two, is on his way into the hall at the General Assembly, him and his wife, President Trump and his wife, were going up an escalator, and suddenly the escalator stopped randomly. And all the escalators as well. And it was seen as a major diplomatic blunder by the United Nations, that you have the leader of the free world, the most powerful man in the world at the moment, couldn't even make it up an escalator without the escalator breaking with him on it. That just shows it was a symbolic act of how useless and how little ability the United Nations has, even within its own building.
Right. Well, my whole look on the UN is it's who really cares.
Right. So that's the other thing, is who really cares. And we're going to hear that. That's going to come up in the next thing we're going to speak about. But Within all of that, within the General Assembly, Netanyahu will be giving his vision and his speech, which always includes fun props. And it will include most of the members of the United Nations, most of the leaders walking out. But like you said, that is irrelevant. The other speech that I found personally interesting was by the head of Indonesia. Now,
Right.
Indonesia, what country is that? Well, Indonesia is actually the country with the largest Muslim majority in the world.
Okay.
Okay. It doesn't seem like it's a major player on the world stage. It's on the edge of Asia and between Australia. But the head of the president of Indonesia gave a major speech at the United Nations, representing the largest Muslim nation on the planet, and spoke about looking forward to some type of agreement with Israel. Now, at the moment, there's no official relationship between Israel and Indonesia. But if this guy is coming across and saying it, it also means that at least undercurrents beyond what we're hearing at the European Union and beyond the recognition of Palestine, which we'll speak about, there is a growing understanding that Israel is taking major initiative in certain areas and is part of the, if you want to call it, the state, the nation states of the world.
Okay.
Now, there is a flip side to that, and that is at the same time, France, the United Kingdom, also Portugal and Malta, and soon probably Belgium, are recognizing the Palestinian state. Now, there are two ways to look at it. One, like you said, it's irrelevant. Two, where does this Palestinian recognition come from?
Right. So this is where I look at it and say it's not just that the international level is kind of irrelevant because it's all kind of for show. But when I look at countries like England or France recognizing a Palestinian state, which I still don't know what that is, it looks to me more as a domestic internal issue for them, is that they're having massively growing Muslim populations that they're trying to placate to keep the riots from their Muslim populations at home at bay, but it doesn't have any real meaning.
Yes. So that is true. Both of what you said is true. On the one hand, the recognition of a Palestinian state is practically irrelevant. What does it mean? Are they going to exchange ambassadors? They're not sure. Are they going to start giving this new Palestinian state more money? They already do that. Are they going to make demands of this Palestinian state that it pretends to be democratic? They already do that. So yes, the recognition of a Palestinian state is absolutely irrelevant, and it shows over and over again. All you need to look is the countries that already recognize a Palestine don't really do anything for it.
Right, but the other argument could be made, which at the same time as or how I feel like it doesn't really matter, it's also really important because symbolism, especially in the diplomatic international arena, symbolism is very important. So it's very symbolic and holds a lot of symbolic weight, while on the ground that doesn't really change anything. The question is can that symbolism can then be used and turned into something?
Right. So yes, it can. And this is why I brought up the seemingly irrelevant event of President Trump getting stuck on the escalators at the United Nations, because everything has symbolic meaning. And the recognition of a Palestinian state is symbolic. But symbolic of what?
Right. Well, that was my question.
And that's the question. So what is it symbolic of? It could be that many of these countries are symbolically trying to reach out to their growing Muslim populations. There is that aspect as well. The other is what we spoke about here, and we speak about all the time on the show, is many of these countries, the United Kingdom, France, Macron himself, the prime minister, he has an ongoing desire for a legacy and for peace. Now, he may be naive, but he's doing something because he wants to take initiative. He wants to change the current trajectory. And while we disagree with him and he is completely off in what he is doing, he's actually doing something, because in his mind, and also in the mind of the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Israel is not doing anything. We're going into Gaza, breaking stuff, destroying stuff, but we're not achieving anything.
Right. Well,
The situation in Yudan Shomron in the West Bank is stagnant. So many of these world leaders who are now recognizing a Palestinian state as a symbol, it is a symbol to try and change up things.
right. Well, it's more like how Israel had the opportunity to take some real initiative and be aggressive or create a different reality, whether it was in Judea and Samaria or in Gaza. And while on the battlefield we're making progress, we can't say we've done nothing, except we've done a lot more than just break stuff in Gaza, although we've broken a lot. There has been progress made. We have brought home 150, how many of our hostages out of 200? We've destroyed Hamas as an organization on an entirety of Gaza level. The pockets of Gaza, of Hamas that still exist, are fractions of the size they were at the beginning of the war. And again, while we'll never get rid of their desire, the material they need to harm us, we've made enormous amounts of progress in removing. The difference is on the diplomatic international front, we haven't turned all of that into a diplomatic initiative. We haven't turned any of that into anything aggressively changing the reality in the international arena. We've turned our military successes into Gaza into temporary small ceasefire agreements with a terrorist organization. It'd be like Goliath beating David and then telling David, "Oh, I'm going to give you another chance." Like,
Right.
what's going on here? Like, it's not realistic. It puts us in the wrong light, which is the exact opposite of everything up north.
I agree with you.
And in Yudav Shomron, Judea and Samaria, also, this is where you've been serving most of your reserve duty. We've made huge inroads, but again, it's also been very limited to specific geographic locations. We haven't dismantled the security apparatuses of the Palestinian Authority. We haven't taken apart any of the extent of the terrorist organizations that are now firing rockets in Judea and Samaria. Over this past weekend, there were 2 rockets fired from Judea and Samaria.
Found, not fired, found.
There was 1 fired from the Ramallah area for sure. Pretty sure there were 2 fired. They found 4 or 5, but they definitely fired 2. Now they're claiming they were test fires. They weren't actually being fired at us. But I'm not sure what the difference is. But the reality is we haven't been nearly as aggressive in Judea and Samaria as we have in Gaza, and we haven't been nearly as aggressive in Gaza as we've been up north.
Right. So all of that is correct. I just want to finish off very quickly with Gaza with an observation I made over the last couple of days. I was up north, and now I was also in Yudan Shomron, and we were getting an update on what is going on in Gaza. And I realized, for the most part, including people in the know, whether you are journalists or even military analysts around the world, don't actually know what is going on right now in Gaza. We know that the IDF is making very slow progress in Gaza City, and they're slowly wiping out more and more infrastructure, getting to the heart of Hamas in central Gaza City. But the details and where the different units are operating, there's very little detail about that. And as somebody who thrives on the news and somebody who enjoys and appreciates nuance and military details and what is this maneuver and where's this brigade, and none of that information is coming out. And while I'm very frustrated about that, I actually see that as a good thing. I actually do.
Right.
If we don't know what's going on, it means we're able to do it and do it well. When do we know things? Usually when things go badly. Now that means, yes, we know over Rosh Hashanah 2 Chaylim were killed, and it is terrible. But as long as we only hear small amounts of information, I'm actually more positive about what is going on in Gaza.
Is it possible more that you don't hear information because we're not actually doing anything?
I hope not. I really hope not.
Because the reality is as the chief of staff has said multiple times, that he's taking the slowest possible routes and the safest possible things. He's endangering the lives of both our soldiers and the civilians on the other side to the absolute lowest point possible. And as we know in life, risk and benefit go hand in hand. If the risk is really, really low, then the benefit's also really, really low, and progress is also really, really low. So it could be that he's dragging it out and going at the absolute slowest pace possible, which is what it looks like to me, in order to not take any risk. But at the same time, with no risk comes no benefit.
Right. So the reason I don't necessarily think that's the case is because now I go back to looking at what's going on in the West Bank, particularly in the Shomron, where there has been very little news about what Israel did in Tulkarem, in Kalkilia, and now in parts of Nablus, in Shechem. Those don't make the news, and there have been minimal IDF casualties in these operations. But for the most part, in many of these major population centers within the Palestinian areas, there has been massive IDF operations. And we're talking about tanks, bulldozers, massive destruction of buildings that housed terrorist infrastructure. And it's not only Hamas. In fact, very little of it was actual Hamas. Much of it was local thugs or groups that got together with enough rifles and some explosives and put together their own tangent of, call it the Lion's Den or a faction of the Islamic Jihad, whatever you want to call it. And they were decimated. They were destroyed. And today you go to some of these places and part of the, people would call them refugee camps, but part of these Palestinian towns are void not only of terrorists, but also of people, because we have operated slowly, methodically, carefully, and taken minimal casualties to our side. So I'm relatively confident that is a similar operation that is being taken place in Gaza because of the lack of information that is coming out.
Okay. We'll disagree. I think it's that we're just not doing very much at all, and that's why there's no information coming out, because no one wants to admit that we announced a massive operation, supposedly called up lots of reservists, although the reality is we haven't. And in the end of the day, it's all for show, and that at this point the military is operating more for show than to actually achieve its goals, which is the way it looks like. Because what you're talking about, Judea and Samaria, you can say that with all the cities, how much we've done, there's entire cities like Ramallah or Jericho or Hebron that the army hasn't touched.
Yet.
Yet. After 2 years, yet is a pretty long word.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yet, where there's, as someone who spent a week in Jericho during the Rising Lions or whatever the operation with the Iran was called, we were there for a week. There are tens of thousands of weapons that the army knows where they are, and we're just not confiscating. We could have done it in a day, 2 days. Just let us. But we're not. They're not touching those areas. They haven't touched Ramallah. They haven't touched Hebron. Those are just three of some pretty big and pretty chock full of terrorist areas the army hasn't even begun to touch. Why after 2 years are we back in Gaza City? That's where we started the war.
Right.
I'm saying, so to say yet and to say, well, there's not, because we're not hearing anything, it's good news, I think is being overly optimistic and overly confident at this point. And I think that at this point, unfortunately, the army is afraid. It's afraid of loss. It's become loss averse to the point where it's not, at least the senior leadership is so loss averse from the bad press and media that it will get from it, that it's not capable of really taking the risks necessary to achieve anything significant. And at the same time, because there's no vision, there's no motivation, there's no greater plan for what happens in the South at a senior political level. So the army is just treading water until it's being told what they want from them.
Okay. I hear all this, but I do want to circle back to international politics, the recognition of Palestine and the United Nations, and tie it into all of this as well. I'd mentioned the fact that some of these world leaders naively, they're the ones who are actually taking the initiative because, like you said, the Israeli government is not. They're not doing enough. While I'm a little bit more confident at the moment, you clearly are not.
Right.
It's because the Israeli government is not doing enough. There's no initiative. There's no foresight. There's no plan.
Right. They haven't presented a plan to the international community, let alone to the international community. They
to
haven't
us.
presented a plan to us, to the people of Israel. There's no clear plan for what the goal is going to be.
Right.
There are these lofty ideas that we're going to defeat Hamas and bring all the hostages home.
And then what?
And then what? Exactly. Or
Okay.
Yudav Shomron.
We're going to defeat terrorism.
Exactly.
And then?
Exactly.
Right. So I'm looking at also from the international perspective with now that the UK and France and Belgium and all these are recognizing Palestinian independence, the Israeli government is now forced to act. They have to react. So what are the options we have? And this is where things are very interesting. Firstly, Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to be speaking with President Trump. I'm sure there's going to be some type of coordination where Israel will come up with a bunch of plans, and then the Americans will either say, we will back you, or we won't get involved, or no, you can't do that.
Okay.
Not great that we have to go to the Americans for everything, but that is the unfortunate reality of the situation at the moment, and it is part of the way we have to play the game. Now, with some of these countries, particularly the UK and France, and a bunch of other European countries, there's an interesting response that Israel has at their ability. There's an interesting response that Israel has.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question. European countries, the UK, France, Belgium, even the European Union, where are their embassies to Israel?
I would assume in Tel Aviv.
Absolutely. Their embassies are in Tel Aviv. But did you know that all of these countries have consulates in Jerusalem?
Actually, I'm aware I just parked next to the French consulate and I had no idea it was even there.
The French consulate next to the King David Hotel.
Right.
There is the British consulate.
Like on the back little alley over there.
It's a large, beautiful building. There is
I had no idea. There's a great parking lot across the street.
There is a British consulate in Jerusalem. In fact, it has if you look on its social media pages, it's UK in Jerusalem. There is a Swedish consulate in Jerusalem as well.
Okay.
If you go up in Katamon, there's a beautiful square and you see a large Belgian flag because Belgium has a consulate in Jerusalem. Now, all of these countries have consulates in Jerusalem, and these consulates serve the Palestinian Authority, which means, de facto, all of these countries have embassies to the Palestinian Authority in Jerusalem, yet their embassies to Israel are in Tel Aviv. So what can Israel do, and what is the Israeli government considering doing, is revoking the diplomatic status of these buildings.
In Jerusalem or Tel Aviv?
In Jerusalem.
Why not in Tel Aviv?
Because Tel Aviv impacts on our relations with these countries.
But if our capital isn't Tel Aviv, wouldn't the stronger say, like, well, you can move your embassy to our capital or you could close it?
That would be, but they're not going to do that. What they are going to do is say, if you can recognize a Palestinian state, we can tell you that's a bad idea, we can't stop you, but you can't have an embassy to them in our city. You can't have a Jerusalem consulate for the Palestinians in Jerusalem. The French can't say we'll only deal with the Palestinians from Jerusalem. You want to deal with the Palestinians, go build a consulate in Ramallah. You want to deal with the Palestinians from the UK, go build a consulate in El Ram or outside Ramallah. You can't deal with the Palestinians from Jerusalem. Jerusalem belongs to Israel.
Okay, so what's stopping them from moving that and creating an embassy in Ramallah then?
Many of these countries haven't. Some countries do, but some of these countries don't.
No, but I'm saying, what's stopping them from doing that?
So that goes back to historical aspects where the French consulate actually goes back to pre-state era. It was where the French built a consulate initially for pilgrims, and that became the de facto French administration during the pre-state times. And then after the Six-Day War, that was where they dealt with Jordan.
Okay.
So these are diplomatic missions that Israel inherited over time.
Right, which goes back to my original question, though. If we're trying to make a statement to the UK or France, saying, okay, we'll close this consulate and they'll go open one up in Ramallah if it's something that's really important to them.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is wouldn't a real, again, going back to the concept of vision and presenting a real plan to the world, wouldn't it make more sense to tell these countries, if you want an embassy with us, your embassy, like everywhere else in the world, has to be in our capital city. No one opens an embassy in New York. The embassies are in Washington, D.C. There's a consulate in New York. No one opens up an embassy in, I don't know, Manchester. The embassy is in London, right? There's no other instance in the world where embassies are outside of the capital city. Maybe on the outskirts of the city because a country can't afford the real estate in the center of town. But why wouldn't Israel then say the other countries, make a statement, have some vision, and be like, this is our capital. You can recognize whatever you want, but we have diplomatic relations. Show some minimal level of respect and move your embassy to my capital, or we'll just close it down.
So that already starts impacting directly on the connections between the two countries. We don't want to negatively impact, even despite all they've done, we don't want to negatively impact on our relations with the French. We don't want to negatively impact on our relations with the British. By closing an embassy, you actually do that. You say we no longer want to have anything to do with you on our level, because when you close an embassy, it is the prerogative, their prerogative to say, no, okay, you're telling us to leave, we're done. And we don't want to do that.
It's called resetting the relationship. It's called creating balance and putting it on even footing. In the end of the day, or maybe we should move our embassies out of Paris and London to some random city next door.
So again, that I disagree with, because again, we don't want to be the people to negatively impact on the way things are going. They've already made pretty harsh statements with the recognition of Palestine. Our response should be, you want to recognize, make a symbolic gesture, fine. The symbolic consulate in Jerusalem is now being closed. Okay. You're keeping it symbolic. You're not impacting on the actual relationship between Israel, the French. So the most important thing, I think, we can agree in all of this, but like we said, the idea is to take initiative, to do something. We can argue in this case what the doing is. But I'm sure in the coming weeks we will see Israel will make a number of changes to their relationship. I'm assuming it'll be closer to what I want, probably not what you want, because I don't think they want to negatively impact the relationship that much. But as we are now enjoying this discussion, it is getting a little late. So we've spoken a lot about initiative, about resetting changes. Where do we go from here? We need to end on something positive.
So I think that one of the positive takeaway is that however we look within Israeli society, we've said this many times, is that how all the criticism that at least I have of the current leadership on the diplomatic level, on having a vision for our future, is that we're now in an election year. No matter what, sometime in the next 12 months, we're going to elections. That's just the reality of the legal situation in Israel. Elections have to be by October 2026. That means sometimes in the next 9.5 months, elections will be called. And the reality is that we have growing numbers on both sides of the political aisle of people with a vision. Now, some people present a vision that I completely disagree with. Some present a vision that, pretty close to what I believe should be the vision for Israel. And some, even further to the right of me, present a vision that I also think is unacceptable.
Wait, you're on the right?
I've been told. I don't like the right-left construct, but I still haven't found a better construct to use for politics yet, at least not in Israel. And in the end of the day, there's growing voices within Israel on both sides of people of real vision with real values that are starting to have their voices heard now. And I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to at least elect or to get elected a whole set of new people. Maybe not replace everyone completely in the current system, but to start putting new faces with new ideas, with new energy in place, that maybe we can move past the reality that we're in today and work towards a positive and successful vision for Israel.
I like that very much. I'm just going to end off with my own views of the last month being on reserve duty. It always surprises me to see the same things over and over again, but it always gives me a great sense of this is Israel, is when I'm with my unit and even different units, left, right, secular, Ashkenazi, religious, Haredim, all in uniform. It doesn't matter what we have been through and what we're doing. Every time I'm in uniform with my friends, it just gives me a renewed sense of purpose and unity that shows us that no matter what, we'll be okay. We'll overcome this one too.
Right. And Sean, on that note, for our listeners abroad, in the New York, Los Angeles, or other parts of the United States, after Sukkot, I'm going to be traveling again to the United States and speaking, trying to bring some of that unity and optimism that we feel in uniform to people who would like to come here listen abroad. I'll be speaking about the impact of Israel's war globally and our position in the global war of the West, the Western liberal democracies of the world versus Islam and the East, and trying to also share what that feels like, that unity that you're talking about, that I also feel in uniform, to try and share that both with the Jewish and non-Jewish communities abroad.
So very important, in the show notes, we will add a link to Ari's escapades in the US, and please follow him and hear what he has to say. And from all of us here at Boots on the Ground, thanks again for joining us. And once again, like, share, subscribe.